year. We know those numbers. He's been a fantasy dynamo this season, but Johnson is a known commodity.
Right.
Folks thought he was going to have a big season fantasy-wise, but we want to know who's been your biggest surprise this season in terms of fantasy at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver.
Yeah, well, Johnson certainly doesn't fit that bill because I thought he was worth the #1 overall selection in fantasy drafts this year, and he has proved that with his consistency you guys were just talking about. Let's start at quarterback.
Okay.
About the year Matt Ryan is having in Atlanta, and I think Kyle Shanahan is owed a lot of credit for getting this team and this offense, especially back to being a high-powered unit in the National Football League. But Matt Ryan is right there alongside names like Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers as the top fantasy quarterbacks in the National Football League. And he's done this with Julio Jones having a rather pedestrian year by Julio's standards. We know he had that 300-yard game, and he's had a couple big games, but he has not been nearly as consistent as someone like an Antonio Brown has been over the course of this year. He's got those 2 great running backs, and he's using everyone in the offense. He is spreading that rock around. He's been very efficient and effective. At running back, CT, last year, who was a bigger disappointment than Melvin Gordon?
Nobody. No touchdown.
Hard to imagine. But Gordon this year, before he got hurt with that hip injury a couple weeks ago, had been a fantasy dynamo, especially since Danny Woodhead got hurt. He proved he can catch the ball in the backfield like Danny, and he had over 10 touchdowns before that injury. So based on what he showed us his rookie year, to have double-digit touchdowns his sophomore year, very surprising what we saw from Melvin Gordon. Hope he'll be okay for maybe one of the final 2 games of the season. And then at wide receiver, this guy's going to play tomorrow night for Washington, but Jamison Crowder.
Wow.
Quiet as kept, as my friend B-Mac likes to say. Now, we got Deshaun Jackson and Jordan Reed in that offense, but this has actually been the most reliable pass catcher for Kirk Cousins. He's only had 3 games this year, CT, using DraftKings scoring system where he's had less than 10 fantasy points. He has been so steady, so consistent. I like to call him this year's version of Eric Decker. Remember last year, Decker was either catching a touchdown or catching 5 passes for 70 yards every game. That's been Jamison Crowder, and I think against that weak Carolina secondary, tomorrow night on Monday Night Football, look for Crowder to have another big game.
Crowder, Gordon, and Ryan, 3 players who have been big time if you had them on your fantasy team this year.